What's up, guys? Welcome to Heresy Financial. This is the channel where we talk about financial topics in a way that is considered heresy to the financial establishment. Now, most people in the mainstream say that student loans for going to college, getting a degree, it's a good thing. You're investing in yourself, you're investing in the future. More and more lately, though, we're hearing voices that are countering that opinion. There are more voices that are becoming stronger and stronger that are saying, hey, we don't actually need a four-year degree. We don't need to go to college and take out so much debt for something that might not have as much of an ROI as it used to. So today we are going to dive into the truth about student loans and college, university, and what it means for you, what you should do about it. Let's dive in. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today we're talking about the truth about student loans and college and university. So let's go down memory lane here and take a little history lesson. Back in the day, it was very, very difficult to get student loans because students are the least creditworthy borrowers there are. Think about it. Would you loan money to somebody who's never had a job, who has no assets, and who has no income, and somebody who is young and statistically very reckless with their decision making? Of course not. Students, young people, are the least creditworthy borrowers there are. So back in the day, it was almost impossible to get a student loan. This meant that if you wanted to go to college, you would have had to pay for it out of pocket or get a scholarship. That's what most people did throughout most of American history. If you went to college, you paid for it. You didn't get debt to pay for it. Because of this, there was a lot lower demand for college than there is today. There were simply less people able to afford it, so there were less people going to college. With the demand a lot lower, that also meant prices were a lot lower. In order for colleges to get students, they had to make their prices competitive enough to other options in life in order to entice people to actually come and sign up. This also made the value of college a lot higher because with less people having college degrees, it made having a degree a lot more scarce, and it meant something more than it does today. Well, just like everything that government touches, as soon as government got involved, it started to go downhill quickly. Politicians were campaigning and they wanted to be able to say, hey, it's a right to go to college and everybody should have the chance to go to college. And so they started pushing for an easier way to go to college. And what that meant was that the federal government started to back student loans. With that one move, you had students going from the least creditworthy borrowers there are to the most creditworthy borrowers there are. Essentially, when you loan to a student, you are loaning to Uncle Sam. You are loaning to the government. You're loaning to the taxpayer because you have Uncle Sam as the cosigner on the loan. If the student defaults, the American government picks up the tab. And so who's not going to loan to a student in this case? Everybody's going to want to loan to a student in this case. That loan is virtually guaranteed to get paid back. You have the power of the taxpayer and the federal government and the Federal Reserve printing money to pay back all of that debt. So needless to say, every lender out there started jumping at the chance to lend to students. Students became flush with cash. People who didn't have the option to go to college before all of a sudden now had the option to go to college now because they could qualify for a loan that would pay their way through college. Well, as with anything in life that costs money, anything that's a good or a service, it's governed by the laws of supply and demand. And so as soon as the demand for college goes up, you have a ton of more people willing to pay for college to go into college, the price is naturally going to go up. Because if you're a college, if you're a university, and you're paying the bills, you have enough students to pay the bills, to pay the teachers, the university grounds, all of your bills, and now all of a sudden your student body, your customer base, has an additional $1,000 a year, $2,000 a year at their disposal. If they could afford college last year, well, you know they can afford college this year if you raise the price a little bit. It's just strictly business. It makes business sense to raise the price a little bit. And then everybody else raises the price, and in order to stay competitive, you raise your prices as well. It's not good business sense to be the cheapest option on the market, especially by a large margin. And so over time, you have colleges and universities getting more expensive. Well, what that does is the federal government says, hey, all of a sudden college students can't afford to go to college anymore. We need to increase the amount of debt they can get. And so you have this downward spiraling effect where there's more and more debt funneled into students that's backed by the federal government, and it's just making colleges and universities increase their prices. So you have a paradox happening here where, number one, college is getting more expensive, and number two, the value is actually going down because you have more and more people going to college that wouldn't have gone to college before, and so that degree is less scarce now. It's more readily available, more people have it, and so it becomes less and less of a special thing. It means less and less, especially to employers. Not only that, but you have the degree programs expanding to accommodate for the higher prices, and so you have other degrees coming out. Before, if you went to college, you had to have an ROI, you had to have a return on your investment in order to make it worth it, and so you were only going to college if you were going into fields like STEM fields that would automatically produce a high return on your investment because they were going to get you into higher paying jobs. But now that college is readily available to everyone through debt, there's more of an emphasis on just getting a degree by itself. And so you have the vast majority of degrees now taking place in programs that don't offer you a degree that statistically has a high ROI. So that's the story behind how we got into this problem where we now have $1.4 trillion in the United States of student debt. And the alarming part is about 10% of that debt is being defaulted on right now. Yes, 1 in 10 students are currently defaulting on their student loan payments. Now, I don't know about you, but let's just be sympathetic here for a moment and put yourself in the shoes of a student who had no idea what they were doing when they turned 18. Everybody told them they had to go to college, but they weren't smart enough to get a scholarship, and so they just took out debt. They didn't know what they wanted to go to college for, and so they just went for a general humanities or one of the many other degree programs out there just so that they could say they went and got a degree. This is a very common story. It's a very average student that I'm describing here, and they probably graduated with anywhere between $30,000 and $50,000 debt. Now, in this job environment that we have right now, this kid is mostly going to go get an entry-level career position, and he's probably going to get paid somewhere around $40,000 per year. So think about this. You're starting off your career, you're starting off your life where your total student loan debt, never mind any other debt you might have if you bought a car or if you have some credit card debt, just your student loan debt might be 1 to 1.5 times your total yearly salary before taxes. Now here's the kicker. Student loan debt is not able to go away through bankruptcy or restructuring. Student loan debt sticks with you. Now, the original intent behind that law was to prevent students from taking advantage of student debt. Because if that law hadn't been put in place, you would have probably had a lot of students who would have said, hey, I'm going to go through college, load up on as much debt as I can, and then as soon as I graduate, I'm going to declare bankruptcy. Because I don't have any income, I don't have any assets, so why not? All it's going to do is wipe out the debt, and then I can start over with a clean slate. And so to prevent the moral hazard of students being able to do this, they said, no matter what, you're not going to actually be able to get rid of that student debt. It sounds like a good idea from the start, but now what you have is almost an entire generation who is loaded up with crippling amounts of debt. 1 to 2, sometimes 3 times their yearly salary just in student loan debt. These are the lowest income earners in our society, and they have the highest amounts of debt. And that's not even to mention the amount of wealth that this generation has compared to the prior 2 generations. Without even taking into account inflation and other things, this generation already has the lowest amount of income and wealth compared to the prior 2 generations at this point in their lives. So this means that we have an entire generation that is loaded up with a crippling amount of debt that looks like it cannot be repaid. Because, number 2, this is the lowest income earning generation at this point in their lives of the last 2 generations before. And number 3, they have the lowest amount of wealth. And number 4, it's a type of debt that literally cannot be erased. It can't be restructured or it can't be taken away through bankruptcy. And number 5, this is a young generation that typically doesn't have families or kids yet, which means psychologically this generation, especially the males, are a little bit more prone to violence or riots or protests and civil unrest. Now, what I've just described for you is literally the perfect recipe for revolution that you see everywhere throughout the world, throughout history. Whenever you have a young generation that's saddled with debt compared to an older generation, you see a recipe for revolution. So this is not actually something that we should be taking lightly. Now, I don't really think anybody is taking it lightly, but let's look at some possible solutions here because there are solutions being proposed from both sides of the aisle here. And I don't want to make this political, but I do want to discuss what can actually be done. Number 1, if this student loan crisis affects you personally, and you have more student debt than you think you'll ever be able to repay, one idea that should bear significant consideration is just making the minimum payments on it. Because there is a high likelihood that something will be done, whether it's a clean slate, an all-out debt forgiveness on student loans, or something else. There's a good chance that something will be done about these student loans. And so if you spend the next 3 to 4 years eating rice and beans and paying $20,000, $30,000 every year towards your student loans, and you finally become debt-free, and then all of a sudden the United States government just wipes everybody else's debt out, you're gonna feel screwed over. So if I was in this situation right now, I would highly consider just paying my minimum payments. Because if nothing else changes, at least inflation is going to wipe out that debt. Because there's a very good chance that we are about to enter an inflationary recession, which means that over the long term, debt gets easier to pay off with inflation. From a societal standpoint, there are a couple options being put forth. One idea is to be able to allow people to pay off their student debt through their retirement accounts. It would be tax-free, penalty-free. You could withdraw money from retirement accounts and pay off some of the student debt. I don't think this is a very good solution because, number one, you're taking assets to pay down debt. Personally, if it was me, I would rather just pay the minimums towards the debt and take my extra money and keep on buying assets and investing in my retirement account. I'm going to be better off in the long run. But this is an option, and it's an option some people will take if it's made legal. I don't think it's going to make a huge dent, though, in the total student loan bucket because, to be honest, $1.4 trillion, that would wipe out the vast majority of retirement accounts in America. And most people are not going to be able or would take the option to use their entire retirement account for this option. Another idea being put forth from the left this time is just an outright debt forgiveness on student loan debt. To be honest, this is probably going to be what's going to happen. There will be some sort of a jubilee or a debt forgiveness program that students can apply to, especially if they have over a certain amount of debt. And if they've made a certain number of payments, there will probably be some sort of massive wide-scale debt forgiveness. The problem with this is that it's going to contribute heavily to inflation because the financial companies who have made the loans, they're basically going to transfer all those loans to the United States government. And so they're going to get off scot-free. They're not going to have any of those bad debts defaulted on to them. They're not going to have to take that hit. And the United States government is just going to pay these off or forgive them through inflation. It's not like these debts are just going to disappear outright. They're going to disappear at the federal government level or at the Federal Reserve level by paying off those lenders. And so now those lenders are going to be flush with cash that they're going to want to do something with. And most likely that's just going to go out in the form of debt and loans in another form or another fashion. So if that's the option that's pursued, it seems like it only makes sense if that happens in addition to no longer guaranteeing student debt at the federal level anymore, because then at least you stop the problem in its tracks. What that would do, though, it would probably collapse the university industry because you drastically deplete the amount of students or the customer base that universities and colleges have. Because if you can no longer rely on debt to get you into college, you're going to have to pay for it out of pocket again or rely on scholarships. And the vast majority of people, especially today's day and age, will not be able to afford college, especially with the current cost. And so colleges and universities, that entire industry is probably going to plummet if that option is taken. Now, the third thing that is also likely, I just think it's the worst option, is an outright debt forgiveness program, but also not doing anything about the problem to begin with. So you just say, hey, free college for all, basically. What that's going to do is that's going to explode that industry even more. So more and more people are going to be going to college because it's essentially going to be free. And what that's going to do is going to make it meaningless because universities will do everything they can then to get new students because it's basically free money. It's just the more students that I can get, the more money I get from Uncle Sam. So a degree is going to become worthless. You're going to have students going to college for no reason. And again, this is all going to contribute to inflation because this is just new money being pumped into the system that is being created out of thin air because this is all going to be coming from the Federal Reserve printing money. Even if it's financed through treasuries, the government issuing debt, that debt is going to be bought by the Federal Reserve. And so essentially, all of this is going to be funded through inflation. And so the net result on society is that prices of goods and services are going to skyrocket. And it might hit different industries at different times, it always does, but the end result is going to be massive price inflation across the board. So what can be done if you do not have student loans and you already have a degree? Not a lot that you can do other than making people aware of the issues with the current system, doing things like maybe sharing this video with friends and family. If you already have a degree but you do have a large amount of debt, if it was me, I might consider just paying the minimums and thinking, hey, there's a good likelihood that something's going to be done about this debt. If there's not, it takes me a long time to pay it off, but in the meantime, maybe I'm investing, and in the meantime, I'm not having to put a ton of money towards this debt, and I'm letting inflation kind of tick away at how easy it is to pay that debt off. And if I haven't gone to college yet, if I'm in high school or if I've taken a gap year or something like that and I'm considering going to school, the only way that I'm going to school right now, the only way that I'm considering this is if I'm going into a STEM field that has a proven ROI, something that actually definitely requires a degree, where I have a very good chance of getting a job where I can pay off that debt in 1 to 2 years, if I have to take debt at all, because my number one priority is going to be to pay for it out of pocket. Whether it does take me a lot longer to fully get my degree, whether I have to work harder because I'm working 1 or 2 jobs while I take my classes, and whether I'm doing a combination of online or community college classes and then maybe finishing up at a state university. I'm going to take the absolute cheapest way possible, because literally no employers anymore look at where you went to college unless you're going somewhere that requires you went to an Ivy League school like Harvard or Yale. So if I'm not in college yet, the number one thing I'm doing is trying to make it as cheap as possible. Spread it out, work through it, take out as little debt as possible, because you don't want to be caught up in this mix, and only go to college if you're getting a degree in something that has a proven ROI, where you're getting a very good, very high paying job from your degree once you graduate. That's the truth about student loans. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe to the channel. And I would love it if you'd support me on Patreon so I can continue to make videos like this for you. Thank you guys so much for watching. You guys have a great day.